Have you ever wondered why the Israelites had to wait to leaven their bread? It's because they didn't use dry active yeast. They had to use sourdough. Now, sourdough is important today for two reasons. First off, it tastes way better than regular bread. And secondly, it's healthier than regular bread. Today in this video, I'm going to show you step by step how to make a sourdough loaf. I'm going to show you in an informative manner such that you understand every part of the process. I believe that understanding the process better will take some of the stress out of baking and hopefully allow you to be more independent in the kitchen. Now let's get started with the starter. Here you can see how much I have. I'm going to remove some so that I don't have to use as much flour to feed the starter. The removal is called the discard and can be thrown out or used in other recipes. I've made pretzels, biscuits, pancakes, and other things with my own discard. Now that I've thrown out some of the starter, I'm going to now feed the starter. So make sure that you have some whole grain or bread flour to feed your starter because it has more nutrients and the bacteria is going to love that. Bread flour in particular has more protein for it to eat. So we're going to add some flour about equal to the volume of the current starter. Now this is no exact science, so don't worry about getting it exact at all. Then we're going to add some lukewarm water. Again, no exact science. Less water makes for a thicker starter and more water makes for a runnier starter. I typically like mine to be more runny, but again, it doesn't really matter. And here I'm just eyeballing based on consistency. One of the biggest things here is that you just want the starter to be completely well integrated with the flour and water. You don't want dry spots of flour that are ultimately going to be going to waste since they're not being eaten by the bacteria. So just make sure that's well mixed. Here you can see my consistency a little bit. Maybe a little bit on the thick side, but it'll work. Soon you'll see me lightly cover the starter. I'm letting it sit out for 4 to 8 hours for it to feed. You can tell when it's ready when it's about doubled in size. The best starters are fed once or twice a day. I personally put my starter in the fridge after it's done feeding. So with this, I can get away with only feeding it twice a week. Now, my starter isn't the healthiest, but give me a break. I'm in college. Now let's start with the actual dough. A recipe will be given in the video description. Now first, please use a scale. Measuring with mass makes everything so much easier. Accordingly, all ratios mentioned are by mass. Now we're first going to start by adding the starter, which I typically do 1 part for every 5 parts of flour. Some recipes say more or less, but this is a ratio I found to work well with my starter. A very healthy starter, for example, may not need as much to provide the same amount of leaven as my starter. Now for the water, which may be the most defining part of the recipe. I typically try and add lukewarm water, but generally it shouldn't matter. What really matters is the amount of water added, or the hydration content. This determines both the workability of the dough and the porosity of the bread after baking. Higher hydration doughs are harder to work with, so beginners should start at about 75%, which is just 75 grams of water for every 100 grams of flour added. Higher hydration is often more coveted though for its end product. So after becoming more comfortable with baking, you should definitely aim to increase your hydration content over time. Mixing the water with the starter before anything else allows the bacteria, or leaven, to be well integrated with the entire dough. This is also why I mix the starter and water together. Salt is added for a similar reason, because you want it to be well integrated with the dough. The last thing I'll add before the flour is oil. Oil is added to make the crust softer, since sourdough stereotypically has a pretty hard crust. I'm pretty convinced this is just a placebo because I've never noticed anything tangibly different, but I usually add some anyways. Maybe it helps enhance the flavor. I don't know. Finally, we get to add the flour. Like I mentioned with the starter, the biggest part with this step is just making sure all the flour is fully saturated after mixing. Since this is so important, I usually sift my flour so that I can mitigate lumps of dry flour in the dough. For this loaf though, I'll do without sifting. Before we start the stretch and folds, we're going to let the dough sit for just 15 minutes. This will hopefully allow any dry flour left in the dough to hydrate. It's important for the dough to be hydrated so that it can develop a gluten structure. Hydrating the flour allows for its proteins to unfold and intertwine with others, which makes up the gluten structure. This should explain why bread flour should be used since it has a higher protein content than just all-purpose flour. Make sure to cover the bread with a damp towel each time after mixing. After that 15 minutes, we will begin our stretch and folds. Literally just stretch and fold. That's it. Don't worry about exact technique here. The goal is to develop a stronger gluten structure by stretching out the dough. I do about 3 to 6 folds, usually, and from varying directions. Then I repeat this process in 30-minute intervals for the next 2 hours. Each time the dough will relax and be ready for more stress. With each consecutive round of stretching, you will see the dough get stronger and easier to work with each time. Doing stretch and folds is so important for baking a good loaf because the gluten structure is what traps air and makes the bread rise. I've had plenty of flat loaves. They're short, dense, and not fun to eat, so make sure you do stretch and folds. On screen is my last set of stretch and folds. It's pretty clear the difference from the first mix. It has become very elastic and strong. Some people take it out of the bowl to stretch, but I just leave it in. I don't think it matters. And one other thing is you may have noticed that I keep watering my hands. It makes it way easier for working with the dough and way better than flour. After mixing comes the bulk fermentation, basically just letting the dough aerate until it doubles in size. This usually takes about 10 to 12 hours for me, but can vary based on the climate that you live in. If you're not ready to bake right after the bulk fermentation, feel free to cover it and sit it in the fridge. When you're ready to bake, you should take the dough out of the fridge and let it sit out for a half hour to let it come closer to room temperature. At this point, you can preheat the oven with your Dutch oven in it. I usually place a pizza stone underneath to block direct heat from the pot. This will ensure the bread does not get too burned on the bottom crust. While the oven is preheating, take your dough and shape it one final time. Then you can use a razor or lame to cut the dough. We developed a gluten structure so we could trap air for fermentation, but the network will be too strong to expand during a bake. So cutting the dough allows air to expand in the loaf, which will increase the size and therefore decrease the density of your final product. Exactly what we're wanting. When you cut, you should be able to see all the layers of the gluten structure that you created with the stretch and folds. This is a sign you did your stretch and folds correctly. Place your dough on the parchment paper to transfer to the Dutch oven for baking. Now we're ready to bake. For the first part of the bake, the lid will go on the Dutch oven. This traps moisture in the pot so the dough does not dry out too quickly when it bakes. Otherwise, it won't be able to rise properly. How's the bread? Good. This might be honestly one of my best loaves. A little bit over halfway through the bake, we're going to remove the lid from the Dutch oven and reduce the heat in the oven. This is to brown the crust on the outside of the bread. It's already risen sufficiently and won't rise anymore from here, so we're just browning up the edges, making it look pretty. Here's the finished product. Nice crust there. Let's see, the bottom didn't get too burned. Yeah, looks great.